How's everybody doing this morning? Okay, not bad. Welcome back. I'm happy to have the honor of being the first speaker back from our break. Question, maybe for my students. Do I look any older today? A little bit? What did you say? Oh, thank you. It was my birthday yesterday. Yeah, thank you. It was. I had it. So it's an extra treat. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, that's okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. I spent it with my son Frankie, and we went out to, I made him go birding with me, and he didn't complain this time, which was good. We saw some dabbling ducks, which is good. Aquatic students, you know what those are. So it was kind of fun. How was everyone's Thanksgiving? Good? Not bad? Yes? How many ate turkey? Raise your hand if you had some turkey. Good? All right, that's good. We went to Friendsgiving, I guess, family and friends, and it was okay. It was a little, I don't know, soulless because it was catered, and I feel like, someone has to burn something, or you need 3 sweet potato casseroles, the kind with the marshmallows that are on them, and one of them isn't that good. The other 2 are pretty good. And then you feel bad for the aunt who brought that one, and you kind of have to, when you're in line, kind of mix it up a little bit to make it look like someone ate. You know what I'm talking about? Maybe. I don't know. Okay. Well, that's good. So anyway, I think I appreciate you coming, and I thank you. And today, I don't mean to sound unappreciative, by the way. It was actually really nice to spend time with friends and family. I'm sure you had that as well. And we're quite lucky. I was quite lucky to have that opportunity to spend that time with my son and with our family. And that's a little bit what I'll talk about today. There's some good luck symbols here, and horseshoe, and there's the Italian horn, and the 4-leaf clover. We'll hearken back to the days of old, and in the 1970-something, there's Turkey Day, and that's me and my mom, and getting the turkey out before I was, jaded, I guess, with the Thanksgiving. But I still remember those times. It was fine. Some of you might know that I grew up in Middlebury, which is the next town over, but I spent my summers in Waterbury, which was great. I spent my summer with my grandmother, and it was nice because either I'd get dropped off, both my parents worked, I'd get dropped off in the morning, or I'd spend the night, and sometimes I'd spend several days, or even the weekend, which is fantastic. It really worked out for my grandmother because she lived alone, so it was great. It was fantastic, and it was where I'd wake up in the morning and I would have the smells of. There's usually several different things cooking, and I'd have in the middle of her cooking everything. She would have a tray, and it would have a little bit of, some of you might know mate cocido, which is yerba mate, which is a national drink of Argentina. And my grandmother was from Argentina, and she would have that with one of these little Stella D'Oro S cookies. I don't know if you know what those are. Maybe if you're the older faculty, probably know. And that'd be waiting for me when I woke up, and the music would be playing. And my grandmother didn't speak English well, and so it would be, the radio station would be tuned to, I still remember, it was WLBA in Hartford, and there would be some wonderful music. Like, did you hear the music when you're coming in? You did? Okay, so it would be energetic music. It was playing. It was a wonderful experience. But what really was great for me was there was my grandmother and my sister, and there's me again, would be a hug. And my grandmother would give me this big hug, and this hug was, I still remember the smell of her apron. It would be mixed with flour and oil and her perfume, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful hug. And her arms were strong, and her hands were somehow, they were scarred, and we'll talk about that soon, but they were very soft, and it was a great experience for me to be able to be with her. There's my family. So you can see there's my aunt, There's my uncle, my cousin. This is my godmother, not related. She was there, a good friend. There's my grandmother. Here's my mom, my sister, and me. Did you know that it was a recent paper that came out that scientists identified over 150 genes that are responsible for melanin production and distribution? So I think I'm definitely a case study right here in my family. This is a fish belly white kid right here, right? So, and this is in Waterbury, and I was really, again, extremely lucky to be there. This is my grandmother and her sisters, and my sister, and of course I'm down here in the corner. And again, it was I didn't know much about my grandmother's story. I didn't know how she got here or anything else. It was, a long story I was to learn. And again, it was nice being there. Eventually I grew up a little bit, and I didn't have to stay with my grandmother anymore. And so my grandmother would come and stay with us in Middlebury. And still, I would wake up and she would be there, and she'd still make me my mate cocido in my breakfast. But things started to change a little bit. Of course, I started hanging out with friends a little bit more in the neighborhood and a little bit less with my grandmother. It was good for her to have me around because we would, again, she didn't speak English, and so when I was in Waterbury with her, we would take the bus to downtown Waterbury, and I would help sort of translate when we'd go to the bank or the post office. It would just facilitate for her. Anyway, things began to change, a little bit less hugs than normal, and eventually there were other changes. She would call our house at 10 or 11 at night, saying there was someone outside of her house in Waterbury. Of course, the first few times it's kind of terrifying. And we realized that it wasn't actually anybody there. She would say that the person on the television was talking to her. She would then start talking to me as if I was her brother, and then her father. At that point, it made it difficult for me to spend time with her because being younger and having the grandmother I knew was starting to fade away. Eventually, she was picked up on the highway walking several times by the state police, trying to get to our house, and my parents realized that it was probably not the best place for her to be alone continuously. We didn't want her, because she didn't speak English well, it would have been difficult for her to go to a nursing home that was around here, and I begged my parents to keep her, or to have her stay at our house. But again, she would have been alone because both my parents worked, we were at school. That would also have been difficult. So the hard decision was made for her to go to Argentina, back to Argentina, to be with my family there. It was my family that you saw, my uncle. And so she did. And I don't remember the last hug I got from my grandmother. I don't remember her going away. I don't remember even saying goodbye. I think that at some point I can make the excuse of saying it was too difficult for me to say goodbye to her, knowing that she would probably not recognize me anyway. Well, that was a functional death, essentially, for me, because even though she was still alive, I knew that I would never see her again, and that was painful, and I became depressed and really, really wish I could have been with her. I did cry a lot. And about a year later, she passed away. I remember my mother coming to me, and she was crying. She just got off the phone, my relatives in Argentina, and she said, your grandmother passed away. And I didn't cry, which was sort of unusual. My mother was crying. She hadn't cried originally, so I feel like I had already mourned her death, which was good. So at that point, my grandmother was buried in Argentina, and I asked my mom if we could go some years later. And we did go. And my mother was able to, and as well as I, to visit some old family and friends and to visit the gravesite of my grandmother. In Argentina, it's kind of odd because in most of the cemeteries, you actually rent the space. You can't buy the space. And so we have to pay every month to have to keep my grandmother interned, which is kind of odd. It was nice. It was solemn. It was very sad. And again, I was reliving that moment when she left. But that sadness turned into a fantastic family party in celebration of her life. That night, all our family and friends and other people from the neighborhood got together, and we had a great time. And then my mom felt that she could start talking about a family story, and we realized how important my grandmother was to me. There's my grandmother. She was she was Italian and Jewish, and my grandfather, who died when my mother was very young, was Spanish and indigenous. He would be what we call mestizo. And my uncles, here's my two uncles, were much older. They would be your age when my mother was born. So my mother was born much later. So really, my uncles sort of went off and started their own lives when my mother was still with my grandmother at a very young age. My grandmother was a really tough person. My grandfather, again, as I said, died, but my grandmother owned a bar, and she made her life as a widow. It was very difficult for her with my grandfather's family. She was never really accepted into the family, and she was sort of cast down upon or cast out and not included in any of the family functions. So it was very difficult for her to be alone. In the bar, there were stories that were kind of funny, but also kind of nerve-wracking, where my grandmother would have a cane and have to beat the people who were drunk out, typically men who were getting a little too handsy and too loud, and it was very stressful. So my grandmother couldn't continue to live that life, so she decided to join her sisters in New York. And so she moved to New York City, and to a place, a neighborhood called Spanish Harlem today. And here, she didn't need to know English. My mother came. My uncle stayed again in Argentina. And it was great for her for a little while. She worked as a seamstress, and she also cleaned houses. My mother was in a convent school, so that way she was always sort of like a boarding school situation, and everything was fine. I think it was the stress of living in a small apartment with her other sisters. She also had an injury where she was working in the 1960s, of course, with new income, post-war income. There was a lot of demand for textiles, and so as she was working, she hurt her hand, and her hand got caught into a sewing machine, and that's where the scarring came from. I realized that after that. So the stress of all these things happened, and something really, really bad happened, life-changing happened, was one of her sisters called the immigration. And the immigration came and arrested my mother and my grandmother. They were here in the United States, and my grandmother was working illegally. She wasn't a citizen, and my mother remembers sitting in the immigration office, and my grandmother saying, "I have no idea what we're going to do. I have no idea where we're going to go." She couldn't go back home. She left. And she had nowhere else to go. She didn't know anybody. So then my mother said that she started writing letters. There's no email, no telephone. And she wrote a letter, just took a chance and wrote a letter to someone, a friend of a friend, in Waterbury. And this friend responded to the letter, sent one back and said, "I can help you. I think I have a solution." The solution was there was a man that lived in Waterbury who just lost his wife and needed someone to cook and clean for him. And so there was an opportunity for her to get married. So my grandmother got on a train with my mother with a suitcase, got off the train, the same train station that's in Waterbury now under the clock tower. Some of you probably have taken the train from there. And she walked over past where Home Depot is now to a place called 5th Street and Charles Street, and right where Route 8 passes. And the story is that the man, he looked out of the window. This is 5th Street now, and the house would have stood here. And as my grandmother came walking down the street, he looked and said, "Yeah, I'll marry her, sure." So they got married. She was able to stay in the country and cook and clean for him. But my mother wasn't allowed. My grandmother didn't want my mother staying with a strange man she didn't know. So she stayed actually in this house with a couple, an elderly couple, that I knew as my aunt and uncle. I had no idea. They were just someone who was there to take care of my mother when she was 15 or 16 years old. And so this 5th Street is still here today. Again, unfortunately, the house isn't there. So that's it. That was my grandmother's story. So you're probably thinking like, well, why am I telling you this story, right? So that's interesting, and it means something. Well, the first part is that even though my grandmother did break the law, she was here, she was working. She wasn't trying to steal anyone's job. She was certainly working in a factory setting that a lot of people wouldn't take, and the labor demanded it. She worked really hard, and she wasn't a monster. And her offspring weren't here to go on welfare or to take from anybody. Hopefully, I'm one of the offspring, so hopefully I'm contributing to society. And the second thing is, what I realized is that while we're all incredibly lucky to be here, sometimes that luck isn't random. That luck sometimes is made by someone else's sacrifices. And again, I wasn't until my 20s before I realized how much sacrifice was made by my grandmother and my mother for me to be here. I'm a proud grandchild and child. I'm an immigrant. I'm a first generation college graduate. And again, I'm incredibly appreciative. And I stand here in front of all of you, which is, again, something that I would not have been able to do unless my grandmother and my mother made those sacrifices. So this story isn't unusual, and probably some of you have similar stories, or maybe you don't know these stories yet, but certainly that they're out there. And a great analogy, baseball analogy that I heard was that you may find yourself on third base, but it's important to recognize that it may not have been you that hit the triple. And so again, thank you so much for making me a part of this community, and again, making me feel so lucky. Thank you.